The morning began calmly at Seattle's Central Fire Station when the new department chief, Marcus Webb, decided to conduct his first thorough inspection of the facility. He had been transferred from Chicago just 3 weeks earlier and was determined to get to know every corner of that historic building that had served the city for over 80 years. Marcus was known for his rigid demeanor and insistence on maintaining impeccable protocols. At 42 years old, he bore visible scars from fires that nearly cost him his life and a reputation as a commander who tolerated no negligence. As Marcus walked through the corridors illuminated by the dim morning light, he observed every with a critical eye. The walls needed painting, some doors creaked more than they should, but overall, everything was functional. When he reached the top floor, where the administrative offices and a small storage area were located, he noticed an elderly woman pushing a cleaning cart. She must have been about 70 years old, perhaps more, with completely white hair tied in a loose bun. Her wrinkled hands gripped the mop firmly as she cleaned the linoleum floor with precise and efficient movement. Marcus paused for a moment, observing. There was something about the woman's posture, the way she moved, that piqued his curiosity. It wasn't the typical hunched posture of someone who had spent decades in manual labor. There was firmness, discipline. He approached and cleared his throat to get her attention. The woman looked up, and Marcus was momentarily surprised by the clarity of her gaze. They were piercing blue eyes, the kind that seemed to see right through people. She showed no subservience or nervousness in front of the department head. She simply stared at him with a neutral and slightly curious expression. "Good morning," said Marcus, maintaining his professional tone. "I'm Chief Webb. I just took over here." "Good morning, boss," she replied in a calm voice, surprisingly strong for someone her age. "Welcome to Central. How long have you worked here?" Marcus asked, crossing his arm. 23 years as a caretaker," she replied without hesitation, turning her attention back to the floor for a moment before looking at him again. Marcus nodded, doing mental calculations. 23 years was enough time to learn every secret of that place. "And before that, you always worked in cleaning?" For the first time, he noticed a subtle change in her expression. It wasn't exactly discomfort, but something akin to caution. "I had other commitments," she said vaguely. The evasive answer only increased Marcus's curiosity. He had a keen instinct for detecting when someone was hiding something, developed over years of dealing with crisis situations. "What kind of occupations?" he insisted, but this time in a less formal, more genuinely interested tone. The woman paused her work completely now and straightened up. Marcus realized she was taller than she had initially appeared, perhaps 5 feet 7 inches. "I've worked in different fields," she said, measuring her words. "Nothing very interesting." "I see," said Marcus, though he saw nothing. He was about to ask another question when he noticed something peculiar. On the woman's left wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of her work shirt, was a scar. It wasn't an ordinary scar from a domestic accident. It was the kind of mark he knew well, the kind that came from severe burns. Third-degree burns that had been treated with skin grafts. His interest intensified. "That scar," he said, pointing discreetly. "A burn?" She looked at her own wrist as if she'd forgotten the mark was there. "Old accident," she replied neutrally. Marcus felt he was on the verge of discovering something important. There were many types of accidents that caused burns, but something about her demeanor, the firmness of her posture, the direct way she answered questions, all of that evoked a familiar feeling in him. It was like recognizing a soldier out of uniform or a retired athlete who still carried the discipline of his competitive days. "Have you ever worked in emergency services?" he asked directly. There was a long silence. The woman stared at him for several seconds, and Marcus had the impression that she was weighing how much to reveal, whether she should keep her defenses up or allow him into territory she had carefully guarded. Finally, she sighed softly. "I worked," he admitted. "Paramedic?" Marcus ventured. "No? Police officer?" "No." Marcus felt his heart race. There was only one other obvious option. "Firefighter?" The slightest smile touched the woman's lips, so brief it almost went unnoticed. "That's right." Marcus felt as if the ground had shifted slightly beneath his feet. A firefighter. There, working as a janitor at the same fire station where she had probably served decades ago. Questions began to flood his mind. Why was she cleaning floors instead of Enjoying a comfortable retirement? Why had no one ever mentioned that there was a former firefighter working as a cleaner? And above all, what was her story? Did you serve here? In this barracks? He asked. I served in several. But yes, I spent time here as well. Marcus leaned against the wall, crossing his arms again, but this time not in a posture of authority, but of genuine fascination. How long have you served? 28 years in the department. 28 years. That meant she had retired from active duty at least 2 decades ago, maybe more. Marcus did some quick calculations. If she was about 70 years old now and had worked as a janitor for 23 years, that meant she had retired from firefighting at 47, a common retirement age in the department, especially considering the extreme physical strain of the job. 28 years is a long time, Marcus said with genuine respect in his voice. You must have seen a lot. I saw more than I care to. Remember, she replied, and there was a weight in those words that Marcus recognized immediately. It was the weight all veterans carry, the weight of memories of witnessed tragedies, of lives saved and lives lost, of split-second decisions that determined who would return home and who would not. May I ask your name? Marcus said, realizing that throughout their conversation, he still didn't know what her name was. Margaret Sullivan. But everyone calls me Maggie. Nice to meet you. Properly, Maggie, Marcus said, extending his hand. When she shook it, he noticed the strength still present in that grip, the firmness of someone who had spent her life carrying heavy hoses and rescue equipment. Marcus knew he should proceed with his inspection, but something kept him there. There was a story about that woman, a story he needed to know. Maggie, he said, choosing his words carefully, would you mind having coffee with me in the meeting room? I'd like to hear a bit about your time in the department. Maggie seemed to hesitate. I have work to do, boss. You can do it later. Consider this an order if you need an excuse for your supervisors. Maggie finally asked. Everything, Marcus said simply. How did you join the department? What was it like being a female firefighter in the 70s and 80s? And most importantly, what was your call sign? The last question seemed to catch Maggie off guard. She blinked, then chuckled softly, a hoarse sound that seemed rusty from lack of use. Call sign? It's been so long since anyone asked me that. The indicators say a lot about a person, Marcus said. They tell stories. Maggie took a sip of coffee, her eyes turning to the window where the morning light now streamed in more strongly. I was Blaze 1. Marcus froze. His mug stopped halfway to his mouth. He slowly set it down on the table, his eyes fixed on Maggie with a newfound intensity. Blaze 1? He repeated, his voice barely more than a whisper. That's right. Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. Blaze 1 wasn't just any indicator. It was legendary. During his training years at the fire academy, back in the 90s, Marcus had heard stories about Blaze 1. Stories that seemed too big to be true. Feats so impressive that he had always assumed they were exaggerated, embellished over the years, as happened with all legends. Blaze 1 had been the first woman to lead an elite firefighting team on the West Coast. Blaze 1 had entered a burning building when everyone said it was too late, and had come out carrying 2 children. Blaze 1 had developed ventilation techniques that were still taught in Fire Academy. Blaze 1 had survived a flashover that killed 2 of her colleagues and still gone back to rescue other firefighters trapped in the same building. And Blaze 1 was sitting there in front of him wearing a janitor's uniform stained with cleaning products. You're the Blaze 1? Marcus could hardly believe it. The real Blaze 1? Maggie gave a half smile. I don't know about true, but yes, that was my clue. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. His mind was in turmoil. Why didn't you say anything? Why doesn't anyone know you're here? Because I didn't want them to know, Maggie replied simply. When I retired, I needed distance. I needed a different life. The job as a janitor gave me that. Nobody recognized me. Nobody asked questions. Nobody expected anything from me other than keeping the floors clean and the trash cans empty. But you're a legend, Marcus insisted. You've inspired generations of firefighters. We still tell stories about you at the academy, exaggerated stories, I'm sure. Maybe some are, but not all. The fire at the Paramount Hotel in 1987. You were there, weren't you? Maggie was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was lower, heavy with memory. I was there. Marcus remembered the story. The Paramount Hotel was a historic 12-story building in downtown Seattle. A fire had started on the 4th floor due to faulty wiring and had spread rapidly. It was February, in the middle of the night, and the hotel was at full capacity. More than 200 people were trapped inside the building when the first crews arrived. "You led the team that entered through the north staircase," Marcus said, recalling the details he had read in old reports during his training. Everyone said that staircase was impassable, that the fire had completely blocked the passage. "It wasn't completely blocked," Maggie corrected. "There was a window of maybe 10 minutes before it would be. We took advantage of it. You went up to the 8th floor and evacuated 37 people." 39, Maggie corrected again, her voice firm. 37 adults and 2 children. The children always count. Marcus nodded respectfully. 39 people. "And then you came back. There were reports of more people trapped on the upper floors, and you went up 3 more floors to the 11th, where you found 6 people trapped in a smoke-filled corridor." 5 people, Maggie said. "And," Marcus noticed his hands trembling slightly around the coffee mug, "the 6th had already died from smoke inhalation when we got there." A heavy silence fell over the room. Marcus knew he was treading on delicate ground, but he needed to hear the whole story, not the sanitized version from the training manual. "What happened next?" Maggie took a deep breath. "We went down with the 5 survivors. We took them to the 7th floor, where another team took over. That's when we received the radio call that 2 firefighters were trapped on the 9th floor. There had been a partial collapse, and they were isolated in a wing of the building with no escape. And you came back to get them." "My team went back to get them," Maggie corrected. "I wasn't alone. I had 4 people with me: Jake Morrison, Robert Chun, Sarah Winters, and Tommy Alvarez. All good firefighters. All brave." The way she said it, with such weight and specificity, made Marcus realize something. Not everyone came back, did they? Maggie closed her eyes for a moment. Tommy didn't come back. He was 28 years old. He left behind a wife and 2 children. Marcus felt his stomach clench. He knew that kind of loss. He knew what it was like to come back from a call, knowing that someone on the team was no longer there. "I'm sorry. It was almost 40 years ago," Maggie said, opening her eyes. "But it feels like yesterday. Some things you never forget." "What exactly happened?" Maggie took another sip of coffee before replying. "We managed to reach the 2 trapped firefighters. They were in bad shape, one with his leg trapped under rubble, the other almost unconscious from the smoke. It took time to free the one who was trapped. Too long. The fire was moving faster than any of us expected. When we finally managed to free the guy and started to descend, there was a flashover in the hallway behind us." Marcus knew about flashovers. Every firefighter knew about them and feared them. It was when hot gases accumulated in the ceiling of a building would simultaneously ignite, creating an explosion of flames that consumed everything in seconds. The temperature in a flashover could exceed 1,000 degrees in a matter of moments. Protective equipment offered some protection, but not much. "Tommy was in the rear," Maggie continued, her voice growing more tense. "He was checking if our escape route was clear when the flashover happened. He was caught head on. The rest of us were a few meters ahead and managed to partially protect ourselves, but Tommy took the full impact. He fell immediately. Jake and I went back to get him, but it was too late. He had already inhaled too much smoke and the extreme damage. We carried him outside, but he died on the way to the hospital." The room fell silent again. Marcus could imagine the scene with painful clarity. He could feel the desperation of trying to save an injured colleague while the fire consumed everything around them. The impossibility of doing more. "Was it your fault?" Marcus asked softly. Maggie looked him straight in the eye. "I was the team leader. Everything that happens to the team is the leader's responsibility. But was it your fault?" Marcus insisted. "The investigators said no. They said I made the right decisions with the information I had. They said Tommy died doing his job, protecting the team. They said I should be proud to have saved the other 4 lives that night. But you don't feel proud." "I feel responsible," Maggie said simply. "There is a difference." Marcus understood. He carried his own scars, his own losses. "Is that why you retired? Because of Paramount?" "Not immediately. I remained on active duty for another 12 years after that. But Paramount changed something in me. I became more cautious, more calculating. Some would say I became a better leader because of it, more aware of risks. Others would say I lost my edge. And what would you say? I would say that I've learned that courage without prudence is just another form of arrogance, and arrogance kills people. Marcus nodded slowly. That was wisdom gained through blood and fire. Then why did you finally stop? Maggie smiled, but it was a sad smile. My body decided for me. At 47, after almost 3 decades carrying heavy equipment, breathing toxic fumes, and subjecting my body to extreme stress, my heart began to show signs of trouble. The doctors were clear. I could continue and probably die in service within a few years, or I could retire and perhaps live to a decent age. The choice seemed obvious when they put it that way. So you retired and came back to work here as a janitor. Not immediately. First, I tried a normal retirement. I bought a small house, I started gardening, I tried to read all those books I never had time to, but it didn't work. I was restless. I missed the fire station, the smell, the sounds, even the people. After 2 years of sitting at home going crazy, I saw an ad looking for caretakers for the fire department. I thought it would be a way to go back without really going back, and it worked. I've been here for over 20 years, and I still enjoy the job. Marcus studied her face. There was a serenity there now, a peace he imagined hadn't been present in those first years after retirement. Do you miss it? Fighting fires, I mean. Every day, Maggie admitted. But I also know my time has passed. I can't do what I used to do anymore. My body won't allow it. And maybe it's better that way. I left the service before my disability cost someone's life. You saved so many lives, Meg. More than most of us ever will, and I lost some too. It's the balance we carry. Marcus remained silent for a moment, absorbing everything he had learned. Then a question came to his mind. Why Blaze 1? How did you get that cal sign? Maggie laughed, and this time it was a genuine, lighter laugh. That's a funnier story. Or at least, it starts out funny. It was my first big fire after leaving probation, an abandoned warehouse in the port area. The flames were enormous, visible for miles. We'd been there for hours trying to control the fire when the roof started to collapse. Everyone retreated, but I saw something, or thought I saw something. It looked like a figure moving inside the building through the smoke. Nobody was supposed to be in there, but I was sure I saw someone. So I went in, alone, without asking permission, without waiting for reinforcements. I just ran straight into hell. And was anyone there? No. It was just smoke and shadows playing tricks on me. But when I got back, our boss at the time, a man named Frank Delgado, was red with rage. He yelled at me for 10 minutes about following orders, about team safety, about not being alone here. Then, when he finished yelling, he looked at me and said I was crazy enough to run straight into the fire like it was my home. He said I was Blaze 1, the first crazy person he'd seen in 30 years who looked like she really wanted to become barbecue. The name stuck. Marcus laughed genuinely for the first time that morning. He wasn't exactly wrong, judging by what I'd heard of his other exploits. Over time, I learned to channel that impulsiveness, to transform it into calculated courage. But deep down, I think there was always that girl who ran into a burning building chasing shadows. That's not a bad thing, Marcus said. The world needs people willing to run toward danger when everyone else is running in the opposite direction. Maybe, Maggie agreed, but you also need people who know when not to run. That's the hardest part to learn. They continued talking for another hour. Maggie recounted stories of other fires, dramatic rescues, and moments of unexpected humor amidst the chaos. She spoke about what it was like to be one of the first women in the department, facing skepticism and sometimes open hostility from male colleagues who didn't believe a woman could do the job. She talked about how she earned respect not through but through actions, repeatedly proving she could carry the same weight, endure the same heat, and do the same work as any man. Marcus listened with growing fascination. Here was living history of the department, decades of experience and wisdom sitting there wearing a janitor's uniform. It was a waste to keep her hidden, he thought. Finally, when it was past 10 in the morning, Marcus had an idea. Maggie, I'd like to suggest something. She looked at him curiously. What? I'd like you to speak with the new recruits. We have a class starting training next week. They need to hear stories like yours. They need to understand the history of this department, the legacy they are inheriting. Maggie hesitated. I don't know if that would be a good idea. Why not? Because these boys should see an old woman telling stories of a time long gone. That's not what they need. With all due respect, Maggie, you're wrong. They need exactly that. They need to understand that this job isn't about individual glory or heroism. It's about teamwork, about sacrifice, about making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. Who better to teach that than someone who has lived those lessons? Maggie remained silent, pondering. Marcus could see the conflict in her eye. Part of her wanted to remain anonymous, safe in her simple life as a caretaker. But there was another part, the part that had been Blaze 1, that knew he was right. Let me think about it, she said finally. Of course, but I hope you say yes. I think it would be good for you too. And I think you deserve to be recognized for what you've done, for what you still represent. Maggie stood up, signaling that the conversation had come to an end. I need to get back to work before someone notices I spent the whole morning having coffee with the boss. Marcus stood up as well, extending his hand again. Thank you for sharing your stories with me, Maggie. It means more than you can imagine. She shook his hand firmly. Thank you for listening, Chief Webb. Marcus. You can call me Marcus. Maggie smiled. Then you can keep calling me Maggie. In the following days, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. He did research, dug into old files, talked to veterans of the department. Everything confirmed what Maggie had said and more. She really was a legend, a pioneer who had paved the way for countless women who came after her, and she was working as a janitor, invisible, unrecognized. Marcus decided this needed to change. He started quietly, mentioning to some senior officers that he had discovered who the morning shift janitor really was. The news spread quickly. Within days, firefighters who knew the stories began seeking out Maggie, greeting her, and thanking her for what she had done for the department. Maggie seemed uncomfortable with the attention at first, but Marcus noticed that she also seemed a little less hunched over, a little taller, as she walked through the hallways now. There was recognition in her eyes as she saw the respect on the faces of the younger firefighters. A week after their initial conversation, Maggie showed up at Marcus's office. Okay, she said without preamble. I'll talk to your recruit. Marcus smiled broadly. I'm glad to hear that. When can you? You choose, but on one condition. Which? No formalities. No speeches about how inspiring or pioneering I am. Just me and them, talking about the real work, about the hard parts that nobody likes to mention, combined. The lecture took place 3 days later. Marcus gathered the new group of recruits in the main training room. There were 15 young people, 7 women and 8 men, all between 22 and 28 years old, all with the eager and determined looks of those who were beginning a new career. When Maggie entered the room dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a simple shirt, some recruits looked confused. They probably expected a uniformed officer, someone covered in medals and decorations. Instead, they had an elderly lady who could have been any of their grandmothers. Marcus gave a brief introduction. Folks, this is Margaret Sullivan. Many of you may know her by the cal sign she used during her 28 years of service in this department. Blaze 1. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then recognition began to spread across the recruits' faces. Blaze 1. The legend. There, in the flesh. Maggie spent the next 2 hours talking to them. She didn't soften anything. She talked about the fear you feel when you enter a burning building for the first time. She talked about the physical exhaustion of carrying heavy equipment upstairs, floor after floor. She talked about the toxic smoke and how it burns your lungs even through a mask. She talked about making split-second decisions that determine life or death. And she spoke about Tommy Alvarez, the man who died under her command at the Paramount Hotel. She spoke about how that loss changed her, about the responsibility that comes with leadership, about living with impossible decisions. The recruits listened in absolute silence. At the end, when she opened the floor for questions, dozens of hands went up. Maggie answered each one with brutal honesty and genuine kindness. When she finished and left the room, Marcus walked her to the door. That was incredible, he said. Did you see their faces? You really got them. Maggie gave a small smile. Maybe. Or maybe I just scared some of them out of the profession. If you did this, then you saved lives. it's better to find out if you have what it takes now than when you're trapped in a burning building." She nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I liked that. More than I thought I would. Thank you for pushing me." After that, Maggie became a regular presence at the training session. She still worked as a janitor, but now also served as a sort of unofficial mentor, someone the new firefighters could turn to for advice, stories, or just an honest perspective on the job they had chosen. Marcus watched this with satisfaction. He had discovered a hidden treasure in his own fire station, and by bringing it to light, he had given the new firefighters something invaluable: a direct connection to the history of their department and to the lessons learned through decades of service. And Maggie, for the first time in years, seemed truly happy. She had found a new purpose, a new way to serve, no longer running into the fire, but guiding others who would do so. This journey, Marcus thought, was a fitting conclusion to the Blaze 1 story.